Coming up next, I have a real treat for you. It's part one of my two-part interview with Dr. Rashid Buttar. And I have to tell you, this man is a true warrior. He's a medical doctor who has faced adversity because of his positions and his stands when it comes to things like vaccines, his approach towards cancer treatment, and other such things. He's maybe considered a radical. People try to label him in different ways. The bottom line is he's a warrior for the truth. He cares about the people that are his patients. He cares about humanity, and he's willing to face adversity and take a stand with high-powered intellect and a force and a passion to get things out into the world that can make people's lives better. So this is a two-part interview. I want to take you right now into part one. Dr. Buttar, thanks so much for taking the time to have this conversation. I'm really looking forward to it.
Thank you, Patrick.
So you have quite a background, and before we jump into the specifics about your perspectives on vaccines and the work that you do with autistic children, let's just talk about your background and how you ended up getting into this type of work.
Well, I did my residency in general surgery. I started my residency at Brooke Army Medical Center at Fort Sam Houston, and I knew I wanted to be a surgeon pretty early on. Actually, before I even went to college, I knew I wanted to be a surgeon, and went through college, medical school, did a rotating internship with a lot of emphasis on surgery, then went on to Korea as a general medical officer with the U.S. military, came back and started my general surgery residency at Brooke Army Medical Center at the Institute of Surgical Research. And one of the things that was very frustrating for me is I'm a very black or white type of person. I don't live in gray zones. And for me, surgery was the only option in medicine because it was the only thing that was definitive. And I had had an experience early on in my clinical rotations as a medical student that had left actually at Brooke Army Medical Center while I was rotating as a student that had, if you want to call it trauma, it probably was a traumatic experience for a new fledgling soon-to-be physician. And at that time, the hospital at Brooke Army Medical Center was still the open bay wards, like in the olden time movies that they used to show. It wasn't, the individual rooms. And I had been called by the nursing staff because I was on call that night, or I was actually the in-house resident that night for a patient. It was a hem-onc rotation, internal medicine. And basically the patient had a fever, needed to be worked up, so I went out there and drew the blood work, did all the stuff we needed to. And it was very eerie, walking back out of the ward. Now, the weird thing with this particular ward was that they would graduate the patients closer to the nursing staff counter as they became more expectant, meaning as they became closer to death, they would move them closer to the nursing staff station. And of course, the patients knew this. They knew that whoever got closest to the nursing staff station were the ones that would be next to die. And of course, we don't think about the psyche of the individual that's sick at the time. We in the medical profession tend to sometimes ignore what they're experiencing. We tend to see patients as numbers. Now, maybe some people would say I'm being callous, but that's how I was trained, and that's how the vast majority of physicians have been trained. And I think that if people were going to be honest, they would have to agree that that's how the medical system has been designed, to detach us from the emotional, spiritual aspect of healing. Regardless, as I was walking back from having done the blood cultures in this patient, I'm weaving my way in and out between the beds, and it must have been 3 o'clock in the morning. The lights were all out. There was some, dimly lit exit lights. And do you ever remember seeing that show called The Crypt Keeper?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, you remember the skeleton hands that they showed? Well, it was literally like that. This hand came out of nowhere and grabbed me by the leg. I shrieked like a little girl, and it was a patient that was so cachectic and looking up at me with these hollowed eyes and begging me to help speed up her process, to help kill her because she was in that much pain or agony or maybe the impending doom. I don't know what it was, but it was like out of a horror movie. And that was the creepiest thing, the experience that I had. I mean, I literally have, had dreams of that hand coming up and grabbing me. And actually the message, what the person said, please help me, please help me. And I'm thinking they need help, like they're in pain. They wanted me to help eliminate them, to kill them, to transition them. Yeah. So why am I talking about that? Well, the reason is that confirmed for me that surgery was the only answer in medicine, because I wanted to be able to see that cancer, be able to cut around it, pull it out, look at it, throw it in the ground, stomp on it, spit on it. It's done, it's finished, it's gone, it's over. Except it's not, because in 6 months it would come back. And it never made sense to me, why is it coming back? Why does it come back? And so that's really how my career began. That's why I knew I wanted to go into surgery. And as I was in surgery, I realized it's not quite that definitive. Mm-hmm. It's almost become a cliche. I hear so many doctors talking about that we don't treat the symptom, we treat the root cause. And yet they use an herb or a vitamin or mineral to do the same exact thing that they're trying to do with the pharmaceutical, right? They're covering up a symptom. They're trying to create relief. Nobody's looking at the underlying causation. They say they are, so that's probably one reason that more of the integrative doctors don't like me. In fact, more integrative doctors dislike me compared to the conventional doctors, because I call them out on their crap. Because if you are really integrative and you really are looking at the basis and the causation factor, then why are you using bioidentical hormones thinking that it's something better than synthetic hormones? Guess what? It's the same thing. You may be using a little bit natural substance, but you're still doing the same thing. You're violating the inhibitory, the negative inhibitory feedback loop that the creator, the ultimate engineer, designed. So anyway, I guess we're way off topic on vaccines here, but you kind of get my basis of where it started.
I'm actually glad you said that, though. And it's interesting because I have had similar outspoken comments around this, which didn't win me favor with some people. And it wasn't something, it was just an observation, not saying you're right or wrong, but saying that philosophically, treating disease with supplements or herbs or treating disease with pharmaceuticals is the same philosophy. You're just using different substances.
Exactly.
And you might say, hey, a safer substance that's more natural is a better way to practice that philosophy than something that's more toxic. But it's not like it's a different approach to practice or a different point of view. It's literally, in the fundamentals, it's philosophically the same mode of practice. It's treating disease and conditions with chemicals. Now, whether they're more natural biochemicals or more unnatural pharmaceuticals, it's still the same cause to effect thing that you're trying to do. So I agree with you on that completely. So when it comes to vaccines, and this kind of ties into vaccines, because what are we trying to do? As you said, the creator, we're endowed the body with an immune system and the ability to adapt to the terrain and the environment that's around us. And now to try to outthink it seems to be a bit arrogant. So I know that mercury has been taken out of a lot of vaccines, but there are other neurotoxins, as you know, for adjuvants like aluminum, et cetera. And also, I think there's still some vaccines that still contain mercury. But do you feel like across the board, getting vaccines in general is probably a bad idea, and that what the effects are maybe aren't autism, but there's other health issues that can arrive as a result of having these toxins injected into your body? What are your views on that?
So let me address the first one. You said that mercury's been taken out of vaccines. That's actually not true, Patrick. Yeah, actually, even in the ones that say thimerosal-free, they have mercury in them. Every vaccine has mercury still in it. And
really?
This was, I'll just tell you this, that I'm still appalled at how the media is so complicit. It's criminal behavior. Congressman Dan Burton, who headed up the U.S. Congressional Subcommittee on Human Rights and Wellness, who is the chairman of that committee, who was the chairman of the committee when my son and I testified before Congress on May 6, 2004, held additional hearings, in which one of those hearings was the one that the head of the FDA and the head of the FTC were required to testify. And the reason for the hearing was there were 3 separate independent organizations, one of which was Safe Minds out of California. I don't remember the other 2, but there were 3 different organizations that had done their own independent testing on vaccines that were labeled thimerosal-free. Thimerosal is ethyl mercury. So if anybody wants this information, because there's no way we're going to be able to get through all this information, but there is a reference site, and I can maybe give that to you guys, and it's free. People can go and watch all these videos. There's 12 videos, and it'll explain everything. You go through those videos, either you get it or you're cognitively not able to comprehend what's going on. I mean, everything's in there. This particular issue with thimerosal is that inorganic mercury, the normal form of elemental mercury that you find in the environment, is considered by the EPA to be the second most toxic substance known to man. Now when you add an ethyl group or a methyl group or a phenyl group, you make it exponentially more detrimental, because now the organic component is going to make it more assimilable in the body, or it allows it to assimilate in the body easier. So ethyl mercury is an ethyl group with elemental mercury that makes it ethyl mercury, or the trade name of it is thimerosal, which is a product that's manufactured by Eli Lilly as a preservative for vaccines. So these are vaccines that these 3 different organizations tested that are labeled thimerosal free, meaning there's no thimerosal in there, there's no mercury in there, there's no preservative in there. Upon testing, all of these vaccines that all 3 organizations tested for had thimerosal in there. So the question was, why is this product being labeled as thimerosal free and still being out there with thimerosal? Because, like, as you said, not all vaccines have mercury anymore. The ones that don't, according to what you said, are the ones that say thimerosal free, but they all have them in there. So during the testimony, Congressman Dan Burton asks the head of the FTC, explain this, because this is a truth in advertising issue. It says thimerosal free, and yet this thimerosal in every one of these batches and every one of these products from all 3 of these organizations. Explain that. The head of the FTC says, I defer to the head of the FDA. Very smart. Congressman Burton asks the head of the FDA, and he says, well, technically, that's accurate. It is thimerosal free. Congressman Dan Burton says, here are the tests. It shows it's got thimerosal in there. What do you mean it's thimerosal free? He says, well, the mandate is that when we take a product and we have a bottle, a vial, and I put the vaccine in it, and I put the thimerosal in it, and I put the X in it and the Y in it, I have to label it with X and Y and thimerosal in the vaccine. However, after the CDC's recommendation, not mandate, but recommendation that we take out thimerosal, we no longer do that. So then Congressman Dan Burton says, then how is it this stuff has thimerosal in it? Head of the FTC says, well, now the thimerosal is used during the manufacturing process of the vaccine. So when we take the vaccine and we put it in the vial, that's all we're putting in there. So we don't have to disclose that there's any thimerosal in there, and that's why it says thimerosal free, because we didn't add it. Congressman Dan Burton asked for criminal sanctions to be brought against the head of the FDA and the head of the FTC. Media didn't cover it at all. C-SPAN didn't cover it at all. This was the greatest atrocity against mankind, and nobody covered it. This is a matter of congressional record. It's in the Library of Congress. Nobody covered it.
Wow.
And this is 2004. This is 16 years ago. Now, that's my first answer. Secondly, you said things such as aluminum and this and that, and people have been talking to me about aluminum, and all the new stuff. Everybody's in aluminum and this and that. Look, I am a clinician, Patrick. I am in the trenches treating kids. Do you know how significant aluminum is to me? 0. You know why? Because when I treat people, boom, it comes right out. It comes right out. I don't care what the aluminum levels are, because I've never had anybody retain aluminum, ever. I see kids with sky-high levels of aluminum all the time. It's coming out. If it's not sky-high in the beginning, it'll become sky-high in 2 months, 3 months, 6 months. Not a big deal. It's mercury that's the last thing to come out. So by putting emphasis on aluminum, whatever researchers want to say, that's great. I can just tell you from a clinical standpoint, it is not significant. It's not significant, not because it's not detrimental. It's not significant because the body's ability to excrete it is intact. It takes care of it. I have never seen anybody with the inability to excrete aluminum. If it is, it's mild and they get rid of it fast. But mercury and lead is bad enough, but mercury is the worst to get out. It's the hardest to get out. And here's the thing. Of all the metals, there's only one that causes denudation of the neurofibrils. The University of Calgary study that shows what happens to the nervous tissue when introducing mercury into the petri dish, not even with direct contact to the neuronal sheath, but just in the same petri dish. Within 6 hours, that neural sheath is totally degraded. It like melts. There's nothing that causes degradation of the neurofibril like mercury does. Nothing. There is no other substance that causes that. Lead has been shown to decrease IQ, but it doesn't cause the detrimental denudation of the neurofibrils. Only mercury does that.
So, because this is interesting, one of the, as the vaccine debate rages on and people look at risks, safety, et cetera, and, we certainly have covered the fact that, there really are no safety studies, and certainly we're seeing, skyrocketing increases in things like autism, et cetera. But they talk about the fact that, they've taken thimerosal out, and that, according to what you just said, that's a bold-faced lie, that these are mercury-free vaccines now. And so now, and this is what I find to be extraordinarily criminal, you have parents who are trying to make the best possible decision they can for their children, and they're doing that based on a volume of lies as compared to saying I have the facts and the information to make an informed decision for my child. So this is really disturbing.
It's very disturbing. Now, if I may take your second question about the other aspects of vaccines, what you said, Patrick, it was a question that you asked, but if you turn that question into a statement, truer words have never been spoken. There is nothing in vaccines that is beneficial to the physiological system. Now, let me explain that, because I'm going to get attacked by this. I'm probably going to have another dozen complaints from the medical board like I've already had, but that's okay. I'm used to it. So let me explain the context. We have these things called human beings that have this thing inside ourselves that the ultimate engineer created in us to help protect us called our immune system. In fact, all biological systems that have an immune system, okay? Plants have it, animals have it, so we all have it. Now, the immune system is designed to be exposed to something that then allows it to become trained to understand that if you have to be exposed to it again in the future, you don't have to go through the entire formulation process of the defense. It's already there. So the foreign substance that you get introduced to, whatever the bug is, or in the vaccine, the idea is that we introduce this substance into the body to help train the body. That's called an antigen, all right? It's an antigen or a hapten. It's a foreign substance that the body sees as foreign, as a hapten or as an antigen, and then creates an antigen receptor site that is the opposite of the antigen, creates this on the surface of the B lymphocytes, and it's like a template. It's like a little, it's a template where it's the mirror reflection of that particular antigen. Then using that template, it starts to create antibodies, which are basically exactly the same thing as the antigen receptor site, except that it's replicating itself and then allowing that antibody to be released. So the antigen receptor site and the antibody look the same, except that the antigen receptor site is connected to the B receptor, all right, to the B lymphocyte. So basically, think of the B lymphocyte as it's a type of white blood cell. It's the part that is the factory that's creating the weapon, which is the antibody, and the template that they use to create the antibody is this antigen receptor site that's connected to the factory, and the antigen is the target that we are creating this antibody, this weapon for, okay? This is how the vaccines work. This is how the whole immune system works. Now, let's go back to the antigen receptor site aspect. So we've got this antibody that is now out there trying to recognize whatever is foreign in the body and fight it and to attack it. That's how the system is designed to work. Now, the problem is that process, for it to be initiated, it's called seroconversion, meaning that you introduce the antigen into the body, then the body creates an antibody, and the antibody is now out there ready to fight. That's called seroconversion. It's converting the antigen into a template, into an antibody now ready to do this fight. That process does not start at the earliest 6 months of life, but most immunologists will say a year to 2 years of life. And some immunologists will say that it's not even fully developed till you're in your teens, 10, 12, 14 years of age. But everybody knows that it does not occur in the first 6 months of life. That's why a mother has to breastfeed a baby. That's why the colostrum in livestock or wild animals is so necessary. If the animal doesn't get its colostrum in the first 24 hours, it's going to die, right? It needs that immunity from the mother because they don't have an innate immune system that is functional right now. It's going to take months. The mother's breast milk creates the IgG antibody to help protect the baby. So we know that that process cannot start till at least 6 months of life. Now we've got children that are being born. First day on the planet, we're introducing vaccines into them because we want to help their immune system, knowing full well we can't even freaking seroconvert for another 6 months. Where's the logic in that? Then, we're giving them things in these vaccines, such as thimerosal, mercury, formaldehyde, nickel, adjuvants, DNA from other species, mutated human cell lines. For what purpose? To create them as adjuvants, to create an irritation to mount the immune response. How about waiting till the immune system can actually mount an immune response if that's your desired result, rather than giving in things that are known poisons to try to elicit an immune response in a child that can't have any kind of immune response because their system isn't designed for that. It's not designed to start developing till at least the first 6 months of life. Okay, then on top of that, what's the purpose of giving a vaccine? To increase the immune system. Then if that's the case, why are we giving things that are known immunosuppressives that decrease the immune system with a vaccine, such as mercury, such as formaldehyde, such as nickel, such as aluminum? Why are we doing that? Does that make any sense? Okay, let's keep on going. Let's just use one vaccine because this is so frustrating for me. Anytime I'm interviewed about this, it's like I want to go ballistic. So I apologize if I'm coming across as hostile, but it's really angering. Let's look at hepatitis B. I was just talking to a doctor about hepatitis B and going through this logic. So what is the purpose of hepatitis B? Vaccine. Hepatitis B is to protect a certain subclass, a certain subpopulation of individuals that are high risk for hepatitis B. Not everybody gets hepatitis B vaccinations, but for some reason we feel that every baby should get hepatitis B vaccination. Hepatitis B is given in 3 shots, series of 3, and is traditionally given every 10 years as a booster. Technically, you should never do another vaccine. You should do titers for the antibody, and if those are sufficient, then you don't need another vaccine, but people don't do that because it doesn't further the vaccine industry, so they just go and get the vaccine every 10 years or whatever the case is. Remember that for a true vaccine, one time you teach your immune system, you never need to do it again. So this whole thing about giving reboosters, that's all hogwash. It's not based on science, it's based on rhetoric designed to increase more profits for the companies that are making these vaccines. That's a side note. Coming back, now we've got this vaccine for hepatitis B. We know that hepatitis B affects promiscuous individuals, prostitutes, etc. It affects drug users, IV drug users, because they share needles, and it affects healthcare providers, nurses, doctors, because they're exposed to these people, the drug users and the promiscuous people. And maybe also law enforcement or first responders because they're also involved in getting exposed to drug users and prostitutes. So for that, that's the high risk category. Those are the people that have to get hepatitis B, right? Now, we know that it's 3 shots, and we know that you need it every 10 years. That's how they give it. So my question is, why are we giving hepatitis B to our newborn babies? Because we know that in 10 years, they're going to need it anyway. Are we really concerned that our newborn babies, before they turn 10 years of age, will become a doctor or a nurse, a prostitute, or an IV drug user? And if we are not concerned about that, then why the hell are we giving them hepatitis B? And why are we giving them the first day of the planet when they can't even seroconvert? And then the natural way of getting rid of mercury in the system is through the alimentary tract, through the gastrointestinal tract. Well, guess what? The gastrointestinal tract isn't developed for the first 6 months of life. So that's poison that we're giving in, as in thimerosal, mercury, that goes into the system under the pretense of being necessary as a preservative for a vaccine to help their immune system, which is actually an immunosuppressive, drops the immune system. It can't even be cleared out of the system the way that our bodies are designed to clear this stuff out of our system. So now you tell me, is there any logic to giving a vaccine? This is just one vaccine I'm talking about. For any vaccine given on the first day of the planet. In 1991, they used to give vaccines. You and I got vaccines at the age of 1, year and a half, 2 years. In 1991, the National Vaccine Initiative was launched, that they were going to stamp out all childhood diseases. And that's when they went from the first year of life to the first day of life. And that's when we saw the change in autism numbers from 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 30 now. So here's a concept, Patrick. Let's back up for a second. We all walk. We were designed to walk. We were designed to ambulate, right? But man, in his infinite wisdom, and I say that with tongue-in-cheek, with all the sarcasm I can muster, came up with better modes of transportation, discovered the wheel, came up with the car, train, planes. And so now we can go from here to Johannesburg in a matter of 18 hours instead of waiting for 3 months on a boat. So the mode of transportation, it's a good thing. It's designed to make our lives more comfortable, correct?
Yes.
Similarly, we have the immune system designed to work to defend us. And so man, in his infinite wisdom, wanted to come up with a way to protect us from more potentially devastating diseases. And so this whole concept of vaccination was born. No problem. I'm with it so far. I'm following along and in complete agreement so far. Now, if I were to tell you, Patrick, that every time you got on a plane, 1 out of 30 people on that plane would end up either dying or having some type of a neurological permanent condition, or I tell you that 1 out of 30 planes that take off are going to crash and burn with everybody on there dead, would you fly?
Obviously not.
Okay, but you fly every day, don't you?
I fly very often.
Very often, right. So the idea of flight for transportation is a great idea, just like enhancing the immune system is a great idea. We enhanced our traveling modalities from walking to planes. We want to enhance our immune system. Totally get it, I agree. But it's a great concept, but it's a bad product because 1 out of 30 children is being injured. And so nobody's arguing against the concept of vaccination. I'm not. You know, people label me as anti-vaccine all the time. I'm like, I'm not anti-vaccine. I'm anti-stupidity. If you want to give a vaccine, if you showed me a vaccine that was safe, that was designed to actually take the antigen, create an antigen receptor site, and then create an antibody that was actually responsive at a time when the person can seroconvert for a condition that is actually functional, that it'll actually function against, without any detrimental components and additives and adjuvants, et cetera, and preservatives in there, I would be the first one to use it. I would be the first one to use it. That's like a unicorn. If I saw unicorns here, I would start breeding unicorns. I would go into the unicorn business. But there's no such thing as a unicorn. Okay? When they discover a unicorn, that's when they'll discover a vaccine. Now, I'm being facetious. Hopefully they'll discover a vaccine, a real vaccine, before a unicorn. But you know what the real vaccines are? The real vaccines? You remember the chicken pox parties? Mm-hmm. Somebody get chicken pox, parents would send all their kids to that house. That's natural method of vaccination. Exposure. Not getting holed up in your houses. You really want to build your immune system? Go out and congregate and with other people that have that, whatever it is, because viruses are nothing more than an email, a message, a text, telling other people that this is something that's happening. It's a way for us to evolve. If it wasn't for viruses, we would have been extinct hundreds of thousands of years ago. So viruses, you know the difference between a virus and an exosome?
Yes.
There's no difference, right?
Well, I would say neither have DNA, or exosomes as compared to stem cells don't have, DNA material in them, so they're messengers. But viruses and exosomes both are messengers to signal the body to do something.
Right, but the exosome and a virus, when you look at it under electron microscopy, they're morphologically identical. Remember that a virus is nothing more than RNA or DNA particles, right? Exosome is the same thing. An exosome, they're the same size, they're the same molecular weight, they have the same characteristics. And we talk about injecting exosomes into people, but viruses everybody's very, very scared of. So if you look at Rudolf Steiner's work from almost 100 years ago, or more than 100 years ago, during the Spanish flu time frame, that's when this concept of the more evolved virological model was introduced. And I see viruses as nothing more than messengers, that when we get a symptom, then our bodies are trying to help others to also adjust and acclimate and understand what is happening so that we can adapt to our environments. Viruses allow us to adapt to our environment. Global warming, global cooling, change in oxygen concentration, whatever it is, it's a way for us to adapt to our environment. And if there was any truth to how viruses come in and wipe out, humans, it's not the viruses that are causing the wiping out of, the in whatever these different plagues were. It's always some technological advance or some type of chemical addition, but they send out the viral and the bacterial hunters to create this illusion that it's a virus or bacteria, as opposed to where the real blame lies, in order to prevent the real culprit from having to be exposed. So when you look at how the Centers for Disease Control works, they always send out 2 teams when there's some type of an issue that they need to explore. A bunch of people die, they send out 2 teams. You've got the infectious disease team, which is the one that gets all the glory, the movies, the Outbreak and Contagion and blah, blah, blah. That's all the movies are made of. Well, the second team is like the stepchild nobody talks about. That's the toxicological team, all right? It's the toxicological team that was responsible for taking lead out of gasoline, but nobody talks about that. It's the toxicological team that was talking about the contaminants within cigarettes and all these things. Nobody talks about that. So having gone to the CDC a number of times and meeting with the head of the toxicological team, I can tell you they're good guys there too, but they're in a battle constantly, right? Because this is all based upon big pharma and how they basically take their dollars and spend them and how they're attributed. So nobody talks about the toxicological team. Why? Because if there was a toxicological issue that was now revealed to the public, God forbid, some individual, some company, some entity, some society, some organization, some government would have to take the responsibility. So they don't want that. So instead, they will blame it on a virus or a bacteria or a pathogen because, hey, it's naturally occurring, and now it protects the real culprits here.
What's interesting about what you're saying is, and the big contradiction is that, this is supposed to be immunoboosting, right? The idea of a vaccine says we're going to boost immunity, but the reality is it's weakening immunity more and more and more for all of the reasons that you just had described. Even if vaccines worked, which I'm fairly convinced right now that they don't at all, but even if they worked, we're still not learning to deal with naturally occurring wild measles. We're not learning to deal with chickenpox. The things that you're talking about, there are non-threatening childhood diseases that those are immune boosting. That is your immune system working out, as compared to saying, we're going to constantly just bypass normal natural processes and inject very toxic substances into the body and never give your immune system an experience with reality, which is what we have to live in every day. So, it's really, you lay out, I think, in very passionate and very poignant terms, the dilemma of all this. And I love the one characterization, kind of, maybe in summary here, is that I agree with you. The idea of what vaccines, could be able to do as an abstract idea, like the unicorn, is kind of an interesting and maybe even somewhat beautiful thing. But in reality, in an application, it doesn't work. And I think you've given it really an appropriate context, because the whole vaccine conversation or argument, from immunologists and others, they say, oh, well, here's how the immune system works, and here's what we do, and this is why we inject what we do, and here's how the body responds. It sounds like a nice idea. And maybe even somebody with a high level of intelligence, Salk or Sabin and the other people that that kind of thought of these things, wow, they really were intelligent human beings who thought that they had an idea, but there was a hubris or an arrogance to think that they could outwit God, if you will, or outwit the natural order of things. And that's where I think it's very ill-fated.
Well, Patrick, I would say that what you said from a political standpoint is probably appropriate, but I would see it from knowing what I know, and I know that probably in private conversation you'd probably agree with me. I would think that somebody that said what you said is coming from a place of naivete, somewhat at least being naive. And the reason I say that is because there is no way that the modern day vaccine schedule was accident. I believe that it was a pre-planned precursor to what we're seeing today. It was a systematic way of setting up our world's population to be reduced, because some of the powers that be don't believe that the world can sustain a population that's growing at the rate that we're growing. And you brought up this thing, you opened up a couple of cans of worms when you talked about wild-type measles and some of these other things. And again, talking about, I've already been labeled as this conspiracy theorist, as you probably, I'm sure, know. There's only one problem with that. The first word, conspiracy, it's definitely a conspiracy. And as far as theory, that ship sailed a long time ago. There's nothing theoretical anymore. So we know that this is a conspiracy against mankind. And the vast majority of the population already recognizes now, over 60% of the world's population recognizes this as a complete hoax with what's happening with the COVID issue. But the point being that when you start looking at how this entire component works, when you look at how measles, for example, wild-type measles, when they talk about these measles cases that broke out in Disney World or in this country or that country, well, they're blaming it on people that didn't have the measles vaccine. But then there were some doctors that actually went and did titers to see what type of measles strain was this. And guess what? It wasn't the wild type. These people had been vaccinated for measles that were having the breakouts. It wasn't the normal, healthy individuals that had never been vaccinated. These were people that had a synthetic strain of measles that was creating, it's a synthetic man-made version of a breakout of the measles, okay? And here's the thing that you touched on, but we went through it. You said that it's an exposure to these things because we've never had that exposure. Well, guess what? The studies have shown that the people that didn't have wild-type measles or chickenpox or some of these other conditions, their immune system was never primed appropriately so that later on in life, they become susceptible to things like, cancer? That was never, because their immune systems were never initiated the right way. So there's all sorts of implications that we don't understand, and that man in his, again, infinite wisdom, and I'm saying that completely sarcastically, interferes with a system that they shouldn't be mucking around with. It's allowed us to get from however long we've been on this planet to this point, and now all of a sudden we have to be worried about all these different infectious disease processes.
Yep. And I think that's kind of the, taking a step back, looking at the big picture, if you will, that's really the view, is saying, what do we, we're really playing, I feel like we're like 2-year-olds in a high-tech lab playing around with stuff that we shouldn't be playing with.
Exactly.
And the unintended consequences, and maybe, to your point, somewhat intended consequences are very, very chilling. And I appreciate your passion, because it's one thing for guys like me who observe it, and have thought about this and have been activated around it. I didn't vaccinate my children. My 3 children are unvaccinated, but for you, and I can understand the heat on this. You're dealing with these damaged kids. You're actually clinically, and that's a very unique position, which I think is something that adds more gravitas to the whole circumstance, to say, wait a minute, I'm the one having to look in the eyes of these parents who had beautiful, healthy children that have regressed and deteriorated based on a lie that they've been told over and over again. And then they're told they're crazy when they try to contend that my child was fine until they had a certain series of vaccines, and they watch them regress. And you're the one there picking up the pieces, in the trenches, as you described it, and having to deal with this. So it's got to be so maddening for you because of the emotional toil that you engage in on a regular basis.
I see the look in these parents' eyes, as you just very eloquently described, and I also experienced it, but in my daily basis, I don't have to think about it. But when I see an autistic kid and I see the parent, it's like an immediate post-traumatic stress disorder. Like, I'm hearing incoming rounds and I want to dive underneath the table. Mm-hmm. Now, it's gotten to the point where it's way, way better now. I've actually done some work on subconscious self-hypnosis to break that cycle. And fortunately, it's helped. But for years, for probably the first 10 years, every time I would lecture about autism, I would get so angry at parents asking me questions. I wanted to slap them and say, "What the hell's wrong with you? What because they're coming from such a place of fear, and but what am I supposed to do?" And it's like, what do you mean? And it was a place of anger. It was anger because I felt what they felt, and I didn't have somebody to guide me. I talked to everybody that was supposedly an expert, and guess what I found out? None of them knew a damn thing about this. None of them. All the so-called experts, none of them knew anything. The closest person was Boyd Haley, who helped me to understand what was really going on from a mercury basis. But even when we talk about clinical stuff, Boyd won't argue with me. He's in a conference, he stepped back and said, okay, I defer to you because you're the clinician. Because there were certain things that he made statements about on a petri dish, how lead works and mercury works. And I told him, I said, Boyd, that's not what I've observed in clinical medicine. And he says, I defer to you because you're a clinician. So, but all the so-called experts, I won't name them all, they're those are the types of people that really infuriate me, because based upon their lack of knowledge, yet they're embracing it as if they know what they're talking about, propagating misinformation and causing more catastrophic change. So at best, this is misguided and misaligned, maybe some unawareness, but on the worst end, it's highly, highly suspect and sinister.
This concludes part one of my two-part interview with Dr. Rashid Buttar. I look forward to bringing you into part two. There's so much more great information coming your way. I'll see you there.